Welcome to the Face to Face Ministries podcast, the #1 resource for learning what it means to have a healed heart, connect more deeply with Jesus, and experience true and lasting transformation in your life. I am one of your hosts, Melinda Wilson.
And I'm your other host, Kathy Little. Please hit subscribe so you don't miss any of the fresh content that we're continuing to release. And while you're at it, we greatly appreciate your help in getting the word out by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving us a quick review.
You can also keep up with us by following our social media by searching facetofaceministries.org on Facebook, and that has no spaces, no numbers, and no caps, and on Instagram at facetofacemin, and that is all one word.
Our team also offers one-on-one ministry sessions that can be done virtually. And one of our favorite things to do is to train others to do what we do in helping others connect with Jesus. So if you want information on that, we can help you out.
Yeah, and for more information about all the resources, including what Kathy's talking about, our trainings, our events that we offer, visit facetofaceministries.org. And while you're there, please sign up for our newsletter.
All right, let's dive into today's episode.
Can I ask one more question? And
Absolutely.
I know it's huge, and Kathy might say, "This, what does that have to do with it?" And maybe it's just me personally, and I'm the only one that ever wonders about it. She's like, "What are you going to ask?"
I have no idea.
Well, you said you're not afraid of death, and I can feel emotion even as because I've struggled with that most of my life and different things that have, anyway, and my mom's early death when I was 15 and praying and miracles didn't happen, all this stuff. And I want to ask you, Paul, what do you think happens? And I know people are like, "Oh my gosh, Melinda, you're a heretic. You know, you're a Christian. You lead people. You go to heaven." And I'm like, I want to know your perspective on that.
Okay. Yeah, little question. All right, good.
I know.
Ending with a little question.
Oh, sorry.
So for me, heaven and hell are both relationships to love. When you turn away your face from love, it's hellish because you're dealing with your own shadows. You got your own resources. It doesn't work. You're caught up and bound with everything. You turn your face to love, and that's heaven. And we're all going through a journey in which we keep turning away or turning toward. And that's been the call, right? Turn, return, 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 return. And physical death is necessary because it will disconnect us from the brokenness of this broken cosmos, yeah? Which will be transformed. All of creation waits for the revelation of anyone who loves God. So what do I think? C.S. Lewis says that when you start talking about what happens, you enter the world of fantasy, right? It's fiction. This is all fiction, but it's got to be at least as good as this. Because if you come up with something good, it has to be at least that good. And so there are a couple issues involved. One is the choices you make in this life actually matter. And you're going to have to deal with them. Right? Death is not your salvation. Death does not suddenly make everything okay. Mm-hmm. If you're stuck in the middle of harming people and hurting people and you're in your own destroyed world and you have actually done the harm and done the hurt, there has to be a point where reconciliation happens, right? So scripture talks about ages of judgment, and the word judgment there is a word for restoration. In fact, all the words in the New Testament are restorative in nature except for one. Timareo is punitive, vindictive, vengeance, as we define judgment. And it is never used of God. It is only used of how we treat each other. Vengeful, retributive, punitive, timareo. All the other ones, the Croesus family, the Collasus family, they're all restorative in nature. The difference between the judge who sends you to death row, which is a punitive, retributive vengeance system, Timoreo, and the doctor who judges you so that he can put you into the punishment that will restore your health. Chemotherapy, for example, or a cast on your arm, or see the whole picture the early church had of God was a doctor hospital model, not a judge in a courtroom model. And that came through a bunch of lawyers who are in the tradition of the West. And so a couple things have to happen. There has to be restoration and reconciliation. And, you know, when we buried my dad up in Canada, there was just family plus the funeral director. And we didn't, I always say that funerals are places that lies should never be told. And a lot of funerals you go and you hear lies, you know. And but we didn't. We talked about my sister, my brother. We talked about the damage my dad did, but we talked about also the reconciliation that happened, the kind of changes that we'd seen in him, the kind of good things that we knew he had done, right? So it was a mixture, and it kind of bothered the funeral director because I don't think he'd been around anything like that. And so, you know, he says, because he feels like he has to say something. So he says, well, isn't it good to know that as soon as you die, everything will be okay? And he was trying to, you know, be loving in that. And I said to him, as gently as I can, but as forcefully as I can, I want to absolutely disagree with you.
Mm.
Because if it doesn't matter then, it doesn't matter now.
Mm.
Right? If everything is changed then and suddenly it's just like magic, then none of this matters.
Mm.
You can do as much damage as you want, and it doesn't matter. But the scriptures are pretty clear. There are ages of having to deal with something. So this is my imagination, and it has to be as good as this. That when you pass through the veil, we'll call the event of death the veil, or you enter the sleep, you know, you pass through the sleep, as Jesus would say. You enter, it says there's appointed for every person to die, and after that, the judgment. But the word judgment there is krisis, which we get the word in the English crisis from. So you're going to enter a crisis. And the crisis is where everything is laid bare, right? So you come face to face with Jesus. And like Baxter Kruger says, you are face to face and you know he knows that you know that he knows. And so now what? So there's this moment of time. And it's almost like, if I could draw this, when you look at creation, because time is a created thing, right? That's even been proven in science. It's like God wasn't stuck in time, because then time would be God. So time is a created thing. And so, but it's laid bare before God. God knows the beginning from the end because it's like a flat sheet. So in a sense, we all come out of time at the same moment, right? Because God is not stuck in a vertical line here. For us, we're stuck in a vertical line. So for us, our lives are like moving down this line, and we run into this moment of death. And immediately, it's like there's another line that runs this way, right? So you hit that in the moment, and now you've got to deal with everything that is not reconciled. And for you, this could take as long as it needs to take for you to become whole. But that means that every relationship that you've damaged or has damaged you must be reconciled. And so when you look at a baby, that baby goes through this moment of death and is immediately through that moment because there is nothing there, right? There's not a line there, or barely one. It's just the moment is quick. From this side, everybody comes right through. But, for example, what do you do about a Hitler? Well, what if fantasy, right? What if Hitler has to meet with every single Jewish family and person that he has harmed and hear their stories and allow that to break him and heal him from the horrendous abuse he experienced from his dad, right? All of those things that we know are true. But yeah, he did a huge amount of damage, and what if he has to listen and then work out all the consequences and get to the place where he will ask for forgiveness from every single harmed person that he has ever experienced. This way, in this moment, we all then begin to work out the reconciliation that must take place before we all move through it. And everything is gathered up by the Son and turned over to the Father. And there is the redemption of all things. So what could that mean? Well, Lexi's little baby died in September, 30 weeks. That little baby went straight through that. But we're all moving through that. It could be possible that Lexi, from out of time, moves through that and emerges on the other side at the same moment as her little baby, which she then gets to care for and bring and nurse and bring to full developed childhood baby, and then grow until that relationship begins to allow him to grow more and more in the fullness. Because what do we do with the babies, right? Do they instantly become 21-year-olds? So you can see that right now is the best that I know. And it's got to be at least that good. It's got to be at least that good. And so this explains to me why people who go through a near-death experience, they get to see through that veil the beauty of it all, but some get to see the horrendous, hellish work that has to be done in terms of reconciliation, right? And so they bring their own terrified personhood to this thing, all their fears, all their damage, everything that has to be burned away by love's presence in this now moment. And the intention is to heal everyone so that as we move through, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord to the glory of God the Father. And the Son will gather all of this up and turn it over to the Father so that all may be one and all may be all in all.
Sounds a lot like the restoration of all things.
Well, that's exactly what it is. And that's clear in Scripture.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not a universalist, but I believe in ultimate redemption.
Yeah.
And how long will it take? As long as it takes. But it's in this line. See, it's in this line. From this point of view, everybody comes right through and is restored. From this point of view, it takes as long as it takes. And that means that I can choose to participate as deeply and as widely in that, to participate in the presence of Christ, to bring healing to those who I have harmed or who have harmed me, or whatever it takes.
Yeah.
Part of the reason that I have this is, my first decade, basically less than a decade, was in the highlands of New Guinea as a missionary kid. And we all called the missionaries aunt or uncle, right? Aunt or uncle. And aunt is the way we did it. But so on the mission compound that my parents established first, they were first in. The second couple that came in were the Sundas, and Dolores and Jim, and Aunt D, right? And she's actually like Kim, is a very strong person, very present, very grounded. And there was a woman, I think her Donnie name was Inongolekwe, but that might be wrong. But when she became a follower of Jesus, she took on a Christian name, and that was Dorcas. And Dorcas became the Mother Teresa of the entire Bawling Valley that had 40 to 60,000 people in it. And what Dorcas did, one of the things that they practiced in the tribe was they practiced senior euthanasia, right? So when a person got old and was no longer a contributor to the tribe, they would be thrown into the river. And it was a very horrendous, sad thing. The relatives would usually mutilate themselves to one degree, cut off sections of their fingers and stuff like that. And so it was incredibly horrible. But it was culture. That's what they did. And that's how the culture, in a sense, survived. So Dorcas went to all the villages and said, when your parents get to the place where they are no longer functioning for the sake of the village, give them to me. And she established these senior villages and took care of these elderly people until they died naturally, right? And so she did this up and down the valley. And just by virtue of her love, she became an incredibly powerful woman and was recognized as powerful. And she was very humble about it. She was really like a Mother Teresa. And now, when somebody died normally, when a war or whatever, this is the process. The first day that they died, the day after they died, they'd be put in a viewing stand. They'd be propped up, nets all over this viewing stand so that you could look right at their face. It'd be like an open casket, except you're face to face. And the wailers would come and they'd be wailing and all this. And so then when that was done, they'd take the body and it would be taken to a pile of wood and cremated. They'd cremate the bodies right there. So Dorcas dies. Dorcas dies naturally. She was elderly and she dies naturally. And the word goes up and down the valley. And they didn't have telephones or anything like that. So they used callers. So if you had a village, the person with the strongest voice would be the caller. And the caller would go out 4 different sides, northeast, southwest, and they would yell out whatever the news was. That was the primary way of news traveling up the valley. The other way was when they were having wars, they would tell each other what was going on while they were trying to kill each other. So as you can imagine, even gospel stories went up the valley that way during warfare. So things got really confused. Like they came in one day, like to my dad, Tuan, is it true that if we take our wives and we throw them in the river, they'll come out young again? So they got baptism and rebirth and all of this stuff all mixed up because they were dodging arrows. You know? So
playing telephone.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like that. So the word goes up the valley that Dorcas had died. And the next day she was in the viewing stand. So it's at least 24 hours later. She's in the viewing stand and she comes back to life. And the word comes up the valley, Dorcas is back from the dead. And she comes back to life and she says, first thing she says, God has sent me back to talk to these 5 chiefs. They are to meet with me as soon as they can get here. And so the word goes out to those 5 chiefs that they should show up because God has sent Dorcas back to give them a message. So they show up. And Dorcas says to the local village pastor, she says, okay, I'm going to meet with the chiefs. When I'm done meeting with the chiefs, you're going to pray me back to death. And he's like, no, there's no way I'm going to do this because if I pray and you die, they're going to think I killed you. And if they think I killed you, they're going to kill me. She says, nah, you'll do it. So she, in isolation, she meets with all 5 chiefs. And those who were there says when they came out, they looked very serious. Whatever Dorcas told them was very serious. So Then Dorcas says, all right, pray me back to death. And the guy goes, and he prays the most innocuous prayer you can think of. Oh God, whatever, it might be your will, maybe, and if, and all of this. And Dorcas drops dead. And so the word goes up as Dorcas had died again. Well, about 2 weeks later, word goes up the valley that Akumerek, who was a chief, Akumerek has died. And Aunt Dee goes, good riddance. You know, she said to me one time, she said, I'm the one that led Akumerek to Jesus, but I didn't think it ever took. And so word comes up, Akumerek is dead. Next day, Akumerek is back from the dead. And Aunt Dee is furious. She is just like, what a snake. You know, he's back from the dead. Oh, great. And the next morning, she goes out to the larder, the little building outside of their house, and Akumerek is sitting right next to the path, and she totally ignores him. She just walks through, gets what she's looking for, turns around to go back in the house, and Akumerek is right in her face and says, Mama, why don't you talk to me? And she says, why would I talk to you? You know, you're just a snake. Why would I? He goes, what do you mean? Listen to me. I saw the big one.
Wow.
And he's talking about God, right? She goes, what? He said, why are you asking me about this? You were there. And so was Tuan Henry and Mama Bernice, my parents who were living. They were there. And you all welcomed me there. Why are you asking me this?
Wow.
And Aunt Dee, it blew her away. There's no way that he could be telling her something that wasn't actually real. So he walks through that moment, is into the place in which the Father is manifested, and my parents are there, and Aunt Dee and Uncle Jim are there. So what does that say about how time works and how things get worked out? So now you can see some of the ways that have affected how I look at the work of death, right? So this burning fire of love intends to burn out of us everything that is not of love's kind, so that we can be fully free and fully alive. How could we be in the presence of God forever with little pieces of darkness still in us? We couldn't.
Yeah.
So where does it get taken care of? Yes, it's done inside the finished work of Christ from the beginning of the foundation. We were all included into that. But now we get to work it out. We get to work out. In fear and trembling, we get to work out our salvation. Present tense. But then there's ultimate redemption when everything is the way it's supposed to be, in the embrace of love. I'm not afraid of death.
Wow. So good.
Selah.
Yeah, Selah. I was thinking that too.
Just a second.
Oh. Thank you, Paul.
You're welcome.
So
Fear
good.
not.
Yeah, so good.
He's with you.
So good.
There's that little verse. I will never leave you or forsake you. You know that little verse? In the Greek and the Hebrew, when you have a double negative, it compounds. It doesn't negate. So it's to the second power. There are 5 negatives in that verse. So I will never, ever, ever, will never, ever leave you. So it's never to the 5th power, right?
God is with us.
What do we? And will never, ever, 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 ever leave us or forsake us.
I believe you. And I say that because we can hear all these words. And yet one thing about you, Paul, is that, and I think I texted this, and so many people say this about you. I've heard that comment that you feel like when you're talking, like you are being showered by love, because it's not just words that you're speaking. There's a life behind them because you've experienced it. You've walked through it. And it's never like, oh, I'm just going to hear another sermon. There's life and love that has a life force and an energy that is flowing from you and hitting my heart. And I know countless others. And I want to thank you for being that well that you have allowed God to dig in you, or whatever vernacular you want to put that in, that you've allowed him to uncover so much treasure in you, to go gold digging or treasure hunting, as I like to say, that God does in us. And I thank you for thank you for letting him do that in you, so that there's this bountiful source of treasure that you bountifully and freely give to others. And I'm a recipient with such deep gratitude and appreciation. Thank you.
You're welcome. And it comes from a lot of desperation.
Yeah.
And a lot of confession and repentance. You know, like today, you've heard the ways that I've harmed and hurt. And I just knew there had to be more. And you know that I've got a lot of finish work to do.
We all do.
But I tell you that big chunks of the shack have been rebuilt.
Yeah, come on.
Right? And when you hear it, you know that we're made to live a different way than the way that we've known.
Yeah.
In which everything that is not of love's kind is burned away. And here's the other part. Unless we see an incarnation, we don't believe it.
That's true.
Unless we see Jesus, we don't believe that God the Father is good.
Yeah.
Unless we see somebody who has experienced something of the abundant life, we don't believe it's possible. We're waiting to die. You know, death is our terror and our salvation. And I don't want to live like that.
Yeah.
Well, any other way is not living anyway. You know?
Yeah.
I had a gal that wrote me and said, every time I future trip, I know I'm participating in death.
Wow.
The only living one is in the present.
Yeah.
Pass the salt.
Pass the salt.
Yeah. Pass the salt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I can never be separated by life, not by death. I can't.
Yeah.
No one can.
Yeah. Well, Paul, as usual, we could talk to you forever. And I do want to point people to the new Paul Young podcast, which I'm so glad you started, because it warms my heart to be with you a couple of times a week at those little short podcasts that you're releasing. And
you're welcome.
You've got so much amazing wisdom and powerful nuggets that are being dropped there. And it's such a vulnerable space for you to just kind of share. I'm just really glad you're doing it. I know I've texted you and told you that, and it's already impacting a lot of people. So thanks for doing that. Thanks for being part of our podcast again. We do look forward to seeing you in about 6 weeks or so, and in Portland. So thank you.
Thank you, Holy Spirit.
Yeah. We'll have more. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. This is a listener-supported podcast, and if you have received value in any way from our content, we would truly appreciate you to partner with us financially, and you can do that by going to our website, facetofaceministries.org/give for tax-deductible giving. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.